everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today's topic is a tough one, but it's one that we really can't ignore any longer.
Yeah.
It's the link between economic systems,
Right.
our mental health, and even suicide.
It's so easy to get lost in those big abstract economic numbers like GDP.
Right.
But the article Economics and Suicide really brings it home, like the human cost when things go wrong. And we're seeing this global trend across all income levels where financial hardship and unemployment are major risk factors for suicide.
And it's not like this is, some far-off problem.
No.
The Global Employment Crisis report showed over 10 million jobs lost just this year, 2025.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's got to be weighing on people.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating and troubling is how specific sectors are being hit the hardest. We're seeing it in technology,
Oh, yeah.
retail manufacturing, even service jobs.
Mm.
It's almost like the more efficient the system gets, the more people are left behind.
Yeah, the report had some pretty wild examples like AI replacing high-skilled tech jobs. Right.
And automated checkouts decimating retail positions. Can you imagine the stress of losing your livelihood to a robot?
Yeah.
It really makes you question the whole system we live under.
And rightfully so. This brings us to a bigger critique of capitalism itself. This constant drive for profit often prioritizes automation and cost-cutting over the well-being of actual workers. Even profitable companies are laying off people just to squeeze out a little bit more profit,
So even when the economy is supposedly doing well,
Right.
individuals are still struggling, and the system itself seems to be part of the problem.
Exactly. And the consequences go way beyond just a lost paycheck. Economics and suicide details how unemployment and poverty create this perfect storm for increased suicide rates.
Yeah, that's a terrifying domino effect.
Yeah.
Job losses lead to poverty, and then you see skyrocketing rates of anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, and unfortunately suicide.
The article even goes into the psychological mechanisms behind this, talking about the integrated motivational volitional model.
Right. Essentially, it explains how feelings of defeat, feeling trapped, and like you're a burden, all common experiences with economic hardship can actually push people towards suicidal thoughts.
So these massive job losses in 2025, they aren't just an economic crisis.
Right.
They're creating a potential mental health crisis as well.
Precisely. And if we connect this back to those specific sectors we talked about, we can really see the potential for widespread social unrest.
Mm.
Imagine entire communities built around manufacturing now decimated by automation. What happens to those people, to their sense of purpose and belonging?
It's a pretty grim picture, but the question is, can anything be done?
Right.
Are there solutions out there that might help turn the tide on these devastating trends?
There are, and that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Economics and Suicide offer some potential policy solutions and alternative approaches that could offer some hope.
Okay, we'll be right back. This is heavy stuff, for sure, but I'm glad that economics and suicide doesn't just leave us in despair. They actually point to some solutions, especially in terms of government policies that can make a real difference.
Yeah, for sure. The article highlights a few economic interventions that have been linked to lower suicide rates.
Okay.
Things like increasing social welfare spending, active labor market programs to help people retrain and find new jobs.
Right.
Even something as basic as raising the minimum wage can have a real ripple effect.
It's like instead of letting people fall through the cracks, we're actually putting support systems in place, right?
Exactly. And what's interesting is that research shows that even small shifts in these areas can potentially save thousands of lives.
Wow.
It's not about some utopian overhaul. Sometimes practical adjustments can make a huge difference.
That's encouraging.
Okay.
Okay, so the report also mentions some really innovative approaches happening around the world.
Yeah.
What caught your eye there?
Well, Brazil has this program called conditional cash transfers, which gives income supplements to families below a certain income level.
Got it.
The goal is to alleviate poverty in the short term, but also to encourage families to invest in education, healthcare, and job training.
So it's not just a handout.
Right.
It's about empowering people to break out of those cycles of poverty that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And the results have been really promising. The study cited in the article showed that those receiving the cash transfers were significantly less likely to die by suicide compared to those who weren't.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It really highlights how directly investing in people's well-being can really impact something as serious as suicide rates.
Absolutely. Another interesting concept that the article explores is this idea of well-being budgets.
Well-being budgets.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that one. What does that look like?
It's a relatively new way of approaching government budgets where the focus shifts from purely economic indicators to actually prioritizing people's quality of life and the things that contribute to good health. So instead of just obsessing over GDP,
Right.
these budgets factor in things like mental health,
Interesting.
social connection, even environmental well-being.
So it's like taking a much more holistic view, recognizing that a healthy economy needs healthy people, not just profits.
New Zealand is a great example.
Okay.
They actually implemented this approach, and one of their well-being budget priorities is specifically aimed at reducing child poverty.
That makes so much sense. If you can create a more supportive environment for kids and families early on, you're setting them up for better outcomes down the line
Right.
and potentially preventing a lot of hardship in the future.
Exactly. But while these kinds of approaches are encouraging, the Global Employment Crisis report really pushes us to think even bigger.
Okay.
It argues that we need to consider completely different economic models if we truly want to address these systemic issues.
Okay, now we're getting to the really juicy stuff. But to be honest, when I hear alternative economic model, my brain kind of freezes up.
Yeah, I get it.
Can you break that down for us a bit?
Sure, it can be daunting to imagine something outside the framework of capitalism, which is all most of us have ever known.
Right.
But the report touches on some interesting concepts like worker cooperatives, for instance.
Worker cooperatives, what are those exactly?
Imagine a company where the employees themselves are the owners. They make decisions about everything together. Salaries, hiring, what products or services they offer.
Wow.
Profits are shared equitably among all the workers. So everyone has a real stake in the success of the business.
That sounds incredibly empowering. It's like, by design, it prevents that disconnect we see in traditional capitalism, where executives at the top are prioritizing profit over the well-being of the people actually doing the work.
Exactly. Another model the report mentions is publicly owned enterprises where the government owns and runs certain businesses.
And that one always gets people debating. Doesn't that lead to like less innovation, less efficiency?
Right.
I feel like that's the classic argument against anything run by the government.
That's a common misconception. While there are definitely valid discussions to be had about the role of government in the economy, the report challenges this assumption that capitalism is the only path to innovation and efficiency. There are plenty of examples of successful publicly owned enterprises around the world.
So it's really about questioning those like deeply ingrained assumptions we have about how the economy has to work and opening our minds to different possibilities, right?
Precisely, it's about asking ourselves, what if, instead of maximizing profit at all costs, we prioritize human well-being and a more sustainable future? What kind of world could we create then?
That's a big question and definitely something for all of us to ponder as we move into the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've uncovered this pretty terrifying connection between economic hardship, job losses, and the increased risk of suicide.
Yeah.
But we've also talked about some potential solutions.
Right.
From policy changes to these innovative social programs happening around the world.
Right. But remember, the global employment crisis pushes us to think even more radically. It argues that just tweaking the current system might not be enough.
Right.
We need to consider like fundamentally different economic models altogether.
Okay, let's get into that in the last part.
Yeah.
We touched on worker cooperatives and publicly owned enterprises.
Right.
Can you paint a more concrete picture for our listeners? Like, what would these systems actually look like in practice?
Sure, let's start with worker cooperatives. Imagine a company where the employees are the owners.
Okay.
They collectively make all the decisions from salaries and hiring to what products or services they offer.
Wow.
And then the profits are shared equitably amongst everyone. So each worker has a real stake in the company's success.
So it's like built in to prevent that huge disconnect we see in traditional capitalism, where executives at the top are prioritizing profit over the well-being of the people on the ground actually doing the work.
Exactly. It's a system designed to distribute power more evenly, giving workers a real voice and control over their livelihoods.
What about publicly owned enterprises? What are the potential benefits of having the government run certain businesses?
Well, one major advantage is the potential for greater social responsibility instead of being driven solely by profit.
Right.
These enterprises could prioritize things like job creation, environmental sustainability, and providing essential goods and services to the public.
So things like healthcare, education, and public transportation could be run with the needs of the people in mind, rather than just the bottom line.
Precisely, it's about shifting the focus from profit maximization to serving the common good. And while some might argue that government-run businesses are inherently inefficient, there are plenty of successful examples around the world that challenge that assumption.
Right, and the global employment crisis really drives home the point that capitalism as we know it is prone to these cycles of boom and bust. Workers are often left extremely vulnerable during economic downturns, and the system itself doesn't seem to have adequate safeguards.
Exactly. That relentless pursuit of profit that's baked into the DNA of capitalism often comes at the expense of worker well-being and environmental sustainability. And as we've seen, those factors have a direct and devastating impact on mental health and suicide rates.
So the key takeaway here is that economic hardship, often fueled by the inherent flaws of capitalism, has this ripple effect impacting individuals and society as a whole.
Absolutely. And if socioeconomic factors play such a significant role in suicide, as this research shows, then we have a moral imperative to advocate for systems that actually prioritize human well-being.
I couldn't agree more. It's not about blaming individuals or telling people to just work harder.
Right.
It's about recognizing the systemic issues at play and working to create a society where everyone has the opportunity to not just survive, but thrive.
Precisely, the challenge before us is to envision and build a future where economic justice and human well-being are at the forefront of our decisions, both individually and as a society.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with. So for all of you listening out there, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic. Think critically about the systems we live in and imagine what a more just and humane economic future could look like. And as always, remember, you're not alone. There are resources available if you or someone you know is struggling. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.